welcome to our fourth episode of LogiTalk. My name is Gabriella Deyi here, and I'm excited to be talking about Earth Day today and Earth Month with our very, very special guest. The theme of Earth Day this year was Restore Our Earth. The theme focuses on natural processes, emerging green technologies, and innovative thinking that can restore the world's ecosystems. As the month comes to a close, I believe it is helpful to look to the future of eliminating climate change with hope that fuels action. Hope that innovative thinking can be the education that we lean on to lead us forward. And speaking of leading us forward, when we look towards climate change in 2021 and beyond, the faces, dare I say leaders, of the movement are becoming younger and younger. Their voices deserve to be heard because by listening, they can inspire us all to be far more urgent than we have been in our pursuit for climate justice. A few of those prominent young voices are Amy and Ella Meek. The Meek sisters, Amy and Ella, at only 12 and 10 years old, became the founders of Kids Against Plastic. In 2016, after learning about the UN's global goals and taking seriously the need for everyone to do their part, the girls decided that they needed to act. Since then, over the last 5 years, they've worked incredibly hard to inspire school children, engage politicians, business leaders, and academics, and to motivate families, cafes, businesses, and people to become more aware of the effects our habits have on our planet. From presenting their first TEDx talk and speaking to leaders in the aviation industry about reducing their plastic footprint, to addressing politicians in the House of Commons, and attending the United Nations Young Activist Summit in December of 2019, the Nottingham-based sisters are making waves. To top it all off, they have recently published their first book titled Be Plastic Clever, which takes a closer look at plastic, its impact on the environment, and the potential solutions, with a foreword by wildlife presenter Steve Backshall. The sisters also had a cameo appearance in Logitech's Defy Logic Super Bowl 55 commercial. On behalf of both of the sisters today, we have Amy Meek. Welcome to LogiTalk, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me as well. I'm so ready to dive into really inspiring the next generation to become more passionate about climate change like you and your sister have, and frankly become interested in planet restoration. But before we jump into that, when were you and your sister able to see your cameo in the Super Bowl 55 commercial? How did that feel for you both?
Yeah, so we're based in the UK, so unfortunately we couldn't actually see it live, which we were kind of gutted about, but we got sent through the advert a couple of days before it went live, and it was so exciting. I literally remember my sister and I, our parents, all gathering around the laptop and all watching it together, and then I think probably watching it maybe 4 times in a row. We were so excited. It was just amazing, and to be alongside Lil Nas X, but also some activists that I've really looked up to myself as well, like Leah Thomas, it was just amazing. We were so excited.
Yeah, we had an interview with Leah Thomas earlier this year, and I think seeing your face is incredible, but hearing your story is even more incredible. And so interviews like this help us really dig deeper with the creators and activists that we work with at Logitech, and help us get to know you better than that 30-second show or that cameo that you had, which is remarkable, but only the surface of who you are. So what inspired you and your sister Ella to start an educational charity like Kids Against Plastic?
Well, it was back in 2016, so it's quite a few years ago now. And at the time, we'd been taken out of school for a few years by our parents, and we were being homeschooled and traveling around Europe. And as part of our sort of homeschool curriculum, we were studying the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were launched just the year before. And as part of these, we came across this really common theme of plastic pollution throughout quite a few of the goals. And it really shocked us because, as I said, this was back in 2016. It was quite a few years before the sort of media explosion around plastic pollution began, and it's become such a hot topic now. And what really struck us was that if we, as this ordinary family, had no idea about the impact that our plastic habits were having on the planet, then, you know, how many other people are in the same situation as us? And if we didn't do something about it, then who's to say that someone else would? And so that was really the catalyst for us starting Kids Against Plastic and taking our first steps into environmental activism.
Absolutely. And speaking of your family, are your parents also environmental activists? What role did they play in you and your sister's mission?
My parents aren't environmental activists, actually. They're both teachers. So my mum teaches quite young kids and my dad teaches post-16 students. And so they haven't got an environmental activist's background, but they have played such an important role in our activism, because I think even going from when we were really young and our parents basically took us since we could walk to go sort of hiking in nearby national parks, and they really created that connection with nature that my sister and I have, which I think has been really important in us in our environmental activism, because you need to have an engagement and an understanding of something in order to care for it. And that really was what made us so engaged with plastic, the impact that it was having on the environment. And I think that's really come from the amazing upbringing that we've had thanks to our parents.
I would even go even further and say that teachers are raising activists by just giving them the tools and the education to learn about the facts so that they can act on those. So in a way, they definitely gave fuel to a very, very brilliant fire. Which leads me to my next question of just, how do you encourage the younger generation to become curious and passionate like you and your sister are about climate change and getting involved at reversing it?
I think it's a great question. And I think that for a start, I think young people have actually done an amazing job at becoming educated on these issues and becoming mobilized, because we've seen the massive rise in the number of young people who've been getting involved in environmental issues. And I think platforms like social media, for example, have a really big part to play in that, because information is literally just at a touch of a button now, which is great. But I don't think it should just be left to young people to educate ourselves and to become involved in these. And I think we really need to improve the education and engagement around environmental issues like climate change and plastic pollution. And we really need to fit these issues into the education system as well, because even if it just starts with the awe and wonder with young kids, getting them interested in the environment and the planet and finding something that they're passionate about, because when you care about something, that's when you want to start to protect it. And then as you get older, you can start to look at solutions and ways to take concrete action. And I think it's really a journey that most young activists have gone through, but I think it's something that all young people should really have access to and should be supported in as well.
Access is key, and it's something that I believe we're going to dive into a little bit later, because you and your sister Ella have created a lot of routes for access through your program and your charity. But when I hear you speak of passion, what I also hear you saying is that it has to be fun and interesting, especially when you're talking to young people. So what are some fun and interesting ways we can all use when it comes to reducing single-use plastic in our lives, like straws and paper bags?
I would definitely say just look simple and try and be creative as well, because I don't think being sustainable has to be a massive cost to your life. I think sometimes it's considered to be that, but really, you don't have to go out and buy all the expensive or specialist gear to reduce your plastic usage, because, ultimately it's not about that. It's about reducing our consumption of all items as much as possible in the first place. And so, we always encourage people to stop using 4 items in particular, which we nicknamed the Big Four, because they're in the top 10 of ocean plastic pollutants, despite the fact that they're mainly used on land. And these are items, like you mentioned, like plastic bags, bottles, cups and lids, and straws are what we call the Big Four. And So, you can get reusable items to use instead of these. You can get loads of really snazzy ones now as well, which makes it even more fun. And, items like these alone aren't going to solve the plastic waste crisis, but they are really easy steps for most people to take. And importantly, they are steps in the right direction, and they're stepping stones towards bigger action. But I would also say, just, repurpose what you have. Reuse those old jam jars and decorate them, and use them for things like bulk buying, so you have to use less plastic. And look for really outside the box solutions when it comes to plastic, because they can be super exciting to try out. Like, we've got these dissolvable washing tablets that we can put in water to use in spray bottles, so that we don't have to buy loads of plastic ones. So really cool inventions like that are really exciting to try out.
That is so cool. Are those are those in the UK only, or are they sold around the world?
I'm not sure. I definitely hope they're sold around the world, because they just come in this little cardboard box, and then it all dissolves in the water, and it's got very little waste to it, which is amazing, and it's exactly what we've been looking for, because cleaning products have been a really tricky thing for us to get around when it comes to plastic.
For sure. I think every cleaning product in my home comes in some sort of plastic bottle, and I don't think, because they're cleaning products, I've never really thought through about how to reduce them. But now that you're speaking of this, it makes me think about the slogan, reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I know that that is at the helm of a lot of programs that are fighting climate change. So let's do a little deep dive into this even more. So, what are some interesting educational tools that you and Ella use to educate other young people you work with on this reducing, reusing, and recycling? You started talking about some of them, but I'm curious to know more.
Yeah, so one of the main things that we do is we do a lot of work when it comes to resources that people can use. So we try and create and compile them as much as possible. So we make our own resources, and we try and make them as fun and as inclusive as possible, with help from our parents, as we talked about earlier, with them being teachers. They've had a really interesting educational view on that, which has really helped. But then also we've compiled with permission resources from organisations like Greenpeace, and some UK-based organisations like the Marine Conservation Society and the Environment Agency, to really cover a wide range of topics, so that basically our website can be like a one-stop shop for people to go to and find loads of information on plastic and other environmental issues, and also lots of different solutions. So that's one big tool that we use. We also have our book, as you mentioned, which was an amazing opportunity for us, and it's really aimed at young people to show them ways they can reduce plastic, but also take steps into activism. And it's got so many awesome illustrations in it, which was so exciting to see on paper. And so I really hope that it's a fun and educational resource that people can use. And then finally, the face-to-face aspect is something that is so important in our activism. I mean, it's something that's been made really difficult by the pandemic, obviously, but we've been trying to continue it as much as possible through videos. We make loads of videos, and also through Zoom. So we have a team of over 100 kids as part of our Kids Against Plastic Club. And so we have fortnightly calls with them to try and educate them and celebrate their amazing work that they're doing themselves, and try and focus on the positive the positive aspects to these issues, to try and encourage them in their own action themselves.
Yeah, and you're right. The pandemic has made that very difficult, and I think that it's also given us a new aspect on how we live our daily lives, and just becoming more conscious of our habits, right? Because prior to the pandemic, I think the world was just always on the go. We were always on the go, that it seemed inconvenient to think about climate change. It seemed inconvenient to slow down and think about the products we're using. And so from that, I think that most people assume you need to be a minimalist in order to make these lifestyle changes. Do you think that's on par?
I definitely wouldn't say you have to be minimalist. I mean, you could ask my parents and they would definitely tell you that I am not a minimalist. And yeah, I'm running an environmental charity. So I don't think it has to be that. And I think actually it's talked a lot about in environmental issues how large corporations and sort of governments are responsible for climate change and plastic pollution and the other crises that we're currently in, through, emissions and production, but also through different tactics like spreading climate denialism, or actually, just as you said, putting that emphasis just on individual action. And even, like there's the fact about BP, the oil company, creating the idea of a carbon footprint and a carbon calculator to try and get customers to take the responsibility instead of themselves. And I think that's really filtered through to this thinking that it all has to be minimalist, it has to be perfect, when that's exactly not the case. Because it doesn't, whilst these organisations have a big part to play in it, it doesn't mean that we as individuals don't have an important part to play. And I really think that it's just about fitting sustainability into your own lifestyle, because even changes that you don't think will make a significant difference, they really do, because a lot of these environmental issues are really collective. So, for example, we produce around 13 billion plastic bottles every year in the UK alone, and that averages out to just over 100 per person. And if you just think about the potential that everyone listening to this going away and stopping using a plastic bottle would have, it would have an amazing impact. And I think there's this really great quote from, I think it's George Washington, and it comes from this old Scottish proverb, and it's many a mickle makes a muckle, which is a really quaint way of saying, lots of these small amounts put together can make a really large difference. And I think it's exactly right, because ultimately, even small changes like these will actually put much needed pressure on those with the power to make changes when it comes to environmental issues. Because ultimately, people like governments and companies, they have to listen to consumers. Because I literally remember being sat in the audience of a very prominent company conference that I got invited to speak at, and I was listening to a speaker before me talk about changing consumer attitudes to plastic and how younger people are less interested in plastic as a whole, which is something that these companies are very aware of and need to take into account in their business. So I've really seen firsthand how much our little changes can actually make on the organisations and these companies that we see as untouchable. And I think even doing the small bits, as I said, will make a big difference, because it's much better than doing nothing. And I think that's one of the things that I find very frustrating in the environmental movement, is this constant shirking of responsibility, because it's so much easier to say, oh, well, this is this country's problem, or it's this company's problem, to take emphasis off your own action, when ultimately we're all in it together, and we all have to take action in our own ways to address these crises. And it's not about being perfect, it's just about doing something, because this really needs to be a societal and a behavioural shift, because we're not going to solve these problems unless we reduce our consumption and make more sustainable choices really across the board, full stop, be that as companies or individuals. So I would really say that it just comes down to one simple phrase, and that is be discerning. So just think before you buy. If it's plastic, try to avoid single-use plastic where you can, or if it's water, don't leave the tap running, or if it's carbon, try and switch to a renewable energy provider, or just walk to work a couple of times a week. And I think it's all about this discerning use of resources that's going to solve these problems, as opposed to looking to massive changes that are unachievable for most people and expecting that everyone's going to transition to that.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Amy, because honestly, that's how we are at Logitech. We really think that small changes lead to big results. And if you just put in these little efforts every step of the way, you look back and you see how far you've come down the line. And I think if we look at climate change that way, it won't feel like this huge, heavy burden that we just avoid or we procrastinate about. And I love everything that you said. How did your peers react to you and Ella's activism when you first started, and how do they feel about your success now? How many of them have joined in to help?
I'm going to be honest. It was quite difficult to begin with, because, as I said, we were homeschooled for a couple of years, and so we were traveling when we started our charity. And so when we rejoined a state school again and we settled back down, yeah, it was a bit of a challenging initiation, because I think there was this bad timing of at school deciding to remove this plastic item at the same time we arrived, which, we saw as this really great thing because there was less plastic in the canteen, but, wasn't seen as the same by some of our peers, because at the time there was still a lot of plastic being used, especially around school, because a lot of people were just unaware about plastics problems and didn't see plastic usage in the same way that we did with our charity. So it was kind of difficult. We got a bit of trolling and people shouting stuff at us in the corridor. And, to be honest, it would have been really easy then to sort of throw in the towel and say, look, we're done. We don't want to carry on doing this. But we knew that we were doing the right thing through our charity, even if it felt like the wrong thing for a lot of other people. But that's not to say that we didn't have support, because our friends are all amazing about it. I think it definitely makes people stop and think when we're with them as well about, should I get a plastic straw with this? Maybe I should think twice about that, which is what we want. And I think actually we've come out the end of it with a much thicker skin. And also I think a lot of our peers have quite different attitudes to our campaigning now, because we've had these amazing opportunities like doing a TEDx talk or being featured on the Instagram official account and speaking around the world. And even with the Logitech advert, because it got put on TikTok here in the UK, and so loads of people saw it. And some of our classmates came up to us at school and were being super supportive about it and were asking. And so it was super lovely to see attitudes changing, and especially as there's this wider societal shift in attitudes towards plastic as well.
Yeah, they must have been wondering, how do we get on? And all you and Ella have to say is, well, maybe you need to be pioneers like us. Um, I applaud you both for handling that situation with so much grace and so much maturity. I think that when people critique you making a change for the better, it's very, very easy to step down and step back and feel intimidated by that. And so to stand in the face of that and really stand firm in what you both believe in is a lesson to us all to do the same when it comes to social justice, climate justice, anything that is propelling the world forward. I know that you both implemented the initiative called Plastic Clever Schools. I would love for the audience to know more about that and elaborate on how the initiative can be altered as we work from home and as some of us are still schooling from home.
Absolutely. So the Plastic Clever Schools initiative is sort of a subsection of our wider Plastic Clever campaign, which is something that I've touched on briefly already. And it's about that discerning use of single-use plastic. And it focuses on the 4 items that I mentioned, which are the bottles, bags, cups and lids, and straws. And the idea is that it really fits into all areas of life, be it schools or cafes or individuals. We basically say anywhere where there's an unnecessary usage of single-use plastic can become more plastic clever. And the idea is that it's not a massive step like going completely plastic free, which is pretty unachievable for most people, ourselves included. And so we see it as a stepping stone to getting involved in tackling plastic and wider action around that. So Plastic Clever Schools in particular is our programme for schools, which is about giving support and structure to help schools to transition to a more plastic clever way of thinking, with the kids and the students really centred at the heart of it as well. So it's kind of got 2 aspects to it. We've got the Plastic Clever Schools Award, which is where the schools audit and reduce their use of the big 4 that I mentioned. And we've also got this resources bank on the website, which is completely free to access for all, be it schools or even people at home, and it's all on our website. And I really think that working from home almost gives this opportunity to fit environmental issues into the rigid curriculum where normally they wouldn't be able to be included. And so, I would definitely encourage anyone listening who is working with their kids to homeschool or are just stuck at home at the moment schooling, then please do look at our resources. And even if you're not going to fit it into learning, just look at your big 4 usage around the house and try and reduce that, because that's a really simple place to start.
Yeah, and at the end, I'm going to make sure that we plug in where everyone can find you, because I've went on your website and even learned some things that I could do better in my own home, that I think parents can look at, kids can look at, teachers can look at, and really try to use that to transform their spaces into more climate friendly spaces, into more plastic clever spaces. I can't help but think about Greta Thunberg when I speak to you, because I hear the passion in your voice. And obviously, we're talking about climate change. And so I'm just so curious if you and your sister at all were inspired by her. And if you've been able to read her last letter titled Big Words, Little Action. What do you think about her critiques of our global leaders and her call to action?
I would say that they're much needed, and I think Greta herself has been much needed. I wouldn't say as a wake-up call, because I think, as she says, these issues were in the political eye before they started to be shouted about. They just were largely ignored by politicians to some extent and were sort of put on the back burner. But I would say that she's more this driving force to demand action and urgency on climate change. You know, as she said in her letter recently, which I did read, and I would definitely recommend anyone else listening to as well. And I think what she does really well is keep climate change in the public eye and in people's attention. And I think it's amazing what she has accomplished in bringing together young people in particular as part of Fridays for the Future. And I would definitely say my sister and I have been inspired by her. We did start our charity a couple of years before the Fridays for the Future movement, but we're definitely in support of it. And I would say, even though personally my sister and I don't quite take the same approach to activism as Greta, because, you know, we definitely work alongside people like her who are doing amazing work to build awareness on these issues. And we instead then try and show the positive ways that people can get involved and through on-the-ground action as well. And I think they really complement each other, because they really show how we're almost all a part of the solution, and we can all do things on a level that we're comfortable with to tackle these issues and to get involved. And I would say that, you know, all approaches to bring about change are really valid as well, because ultimately all activists are different, we're all different people, and it's just about finding methods that reach people the best and help to get people on board. And we all do it in our own way, and everyone chooses to do it in theirs. And I would say, though, that I think that what Greta's done is amazing. I think the disappointing thing, though, is seeing how, like, the media, for example, reacts to her, and how there's almost this fixation on what taking advantage almost on what Greta's achieved, because she's this amazing girl making a change in a really unique way. And I think the media, to some extent, have really gone to town on it and misunderstood what she's standing for, because, you know, she doesn't want it to be about her. She wants it to be about the messages that she stands for. She's said that so many times. And the scientists who are informing these decisions that we need to make on behalf of our climate. And I would say that is a message that most young activists, ourselves included, would give, is that, you know, we don't want it to be about us. We want it to be about the causes that we're campaigning for. And for, instead of people like world leaders to go, oh, you know, you're so inspiring, what you're doing so great, is to then make the change that we're wanting and actually take action urgently on behalf of the climate and the environment as well.
She has faced so many stumbling blocks to the points that you have mentioned, because there is this emphasis on her age and her being a young woman and what does she know, and instead of centering on the problem at hand, which is climate change. And so I'm also wondering, what are some stumbling blocks that you and Ella have had to deal with when educating others about climate change?
I would say the main one is just the amount of misinformation and greenwashing that there is around climate change and plastic pollution. Plastic recycling actually is a perfect example of this, because this is something that really shocked us when we started our charity, is that we got in touch with most of the UK bottled water companies here in the UK, and we asked them how much recycled plastic they actually used in their bottles, and all but one of them said they used 0% at the time in 2016. And this was just something that really shocked us, because how many times have you seen on a plastic bottle or in an advertising campaign around plastic the recyclability of plastic, and actually it's not all it's made out to be? And I think that's something that we're still contending with, to try and emphasize how we need to reduce as opposed to just recycle. And I think it goes further than that, especially around climate change. We're trying to become a net zero family by the end of this year, and so we've had to transition to a green energy supplier. And the amount of times you hear the word renewable or green in the advertising slogans of these companies, when actually, with a bit more research, we found out there are only 2 in the UK that were actually renewable. And so I think just this fact, how often the word green is used, it's almost this buzzword now, because you see this green packaging, you see the word green basically everywhere. And I think it's really put us off using it personally ourselves, like in an upcoming campaign that we're planning to launch around providing information to help customers make sustainable purchasing decisions in supermarkets. It's just something that has been latched onto and has almost been used in a negative way, which is very disappointing. But I would also say one of the really difficult things about environmental issues especially is that they are very complicated issues. So it's not as easy to just say to someone, here is a solution that everyone can do. This is the way we're going to solve this. Because we've really got to think about how we can tackle them inclusively so that, for example, we're not harming those who've contributed the least to climate change through new carbon taxes, or we're not saying let's just ban all plastic straws because there are people who really rely on them for basic needs and who use them for the purpose that they're really intended for, which was to revolutionize lives. And so I think that's another really difficult thing, is that we can't just say one simple thing that can happen to solve these, and we really need to carefully consider all the steps that we can take to address these issues to ensure that we're not causing harm in other areas that weren't intended.
Absolutely. If there's one thing that I've learned from young activists like yourself, it's that activism can be tailored to people and businesses individually. I know earlier last week I was able to talk to a lot of people in Logitech internally about putting our carbon transparency footprint on our packaging. That's something that we recently did, and that's unique to us. And we hope that it's a trend that spreads, but it's unique to us because it's our start of starting that conversation with our consumer base that maybe a cafe couldn't do, but they could find another way to be transparent about what they do. And so I love that you brought that up, because the way that we approach climate change and the way that we approach these changes are going to be unique to the spaces that we occupy. It's not going to look the same for everyone. So one size fits all is not how this works.
Definitely.
I'm very curious to know how you feel about the climate change moving becoming ever so young, right? We're talking about so many young activists. Is a child ever too young to learn about climate change? How old were you and Ella when you first learned about it, and how did you both feel?
I would definitely say that no child is too young to learn about climate change, because climate change is basically science, and I would never say someone is too young to learn about science. And I think my parents always encouraged me and my sister to have a really inquiring mind from quite a young age, and ultimately science is exactly that. It's just about understanding and appreciating the world around us, and I think that's something that every child should be brought up doing. And I think the key is, instead of saying this issue is too complex, is instead making it age appropriate to suit the maturity and the ability of a young person, and also not doing it through negativity and fear, but instead through broadening minds and appreciation for the natural world, and making sure that you actually have reliable and accurate sources to create a foundation of that understanding. I would say that I can't remember the exact age that I first came across climate change. I don't really ever remember covering it in primary school, which I think would be elementary school in the US, and then I left school to be... Yeah, okay. So then I left school at the end of that to become homeschooled for a few years, and that was obviously when we began the charity and we gained this really wide understanding of environmental issues. And so when I went back to school when I think I was 13 years old, I was actually really shocked by how little climate change was covered in school. And I remember especially being really shocked sitting in my chemistry class and having to watch a documentary for the existence of anthropogenic climate change, and then a documentary against it. And to me, that was just so crazy, because this shouldn't be presented as an equal argument. The science is almost set when it comes to climate change, and to present it as anything else is really misleading. And so if we want young people to be engaged in issues like climate change and plastic, we really need to step up the education system to properly include environmental and climate education, so that young people really grow up being aware and engaged in the natural world, and because from that comes the want to protect it, which is really important.
Yeah, that fire has to be, I think, illuminated at a very, very young age, because it is affecting younger people and disadvantaged communities. So without that knowledge, how can you really fight against it? You're just left to be affected by it. And it's interesting that you bring up those barriers in education, because I also noticed that growing up, and when I was a chemistry major in college, there really was no deep dive into climate change. It was a hot button issue, and no one really understood how to educate children on it. So that makes me think, like, do you feel that your age can at times be a barrier to educating adults, because adults are sometimes too afraid to educate children on this topic?
I think it's a really good point. I would say that it can be both a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, I think that young people have this really amazing ability to cut through the noise in environmental issues, because we don't have that vested financial or political interest when it comes to tackling climate change or plastic pollution, because we're basically doing it because we care about people and the planet. And so because of that, we have these really unique perspectives on these issues and can come up with some really incredible solutions to it. But then on the other hand, I would say, how many times have you seen or heard someone say, go back to school to you, a youth activist? We often aren't taken seriously by the very people that we actually really want to listen. So the people in power who have the potential to make a really big change. And we can be treated as this token voice for companies or governments to tick a box. But I really think that people sometimes forget that just because we're young, it doesn't mean that we should be belittled, and it doesn't mean that we don't have the potential to make a change, because after all, I'm 17, so I'm expected now to make choices that will affect the rest of my life through the university I go to, for example, or even being able to vote in less than a year. And yet for some reason, I can't have a stance or an understanding on issues that will and already are impacting my future in large and more detrimental ways. And so I would really say the best way to encourage young people to stand up for a cause is just to listen to us and to include us on company boards alongside adults, and to value our contributions, because our age isn't really a way to determine the contribution and the value that we have.
You could have fooled me, Amy. I thought that you were older than me throughout this conversation. You're much wiser. I love that you talk about what adults can do to support children, because it makes me think of your father and your parents, and they're so involved, and it's wonderful to see. So is there any other ways that you think parents can support their children better if they are activists in any space?
I would basically just build on the point I've been making, which is really just to listen, because listening is so key at all levels of activism. And if, for example, your child comes home having learnt about plastic and wants to stop buying plastic water bottles, then listen to them. Encourage that passion, really support them and help them make their work positive and meaningful as well. Because so often we as young people are told to, sit down and be quiet, especially at school. And so the best thing you can do is to encourage that initiative in your child and to help guide their focus and their passion to something good, and to really create that safe and supportive space that encourages and nurtures change making in children.
Safe, supportive, nurturing. It I think that all defines a partnership, right? Like your child or your young activist, you have to be in partnership with them and encourage them in these spaces, because, not to be cliche, but they are the future, right? And if we don't listen to them, I really don't quite understand what we're left to do. We're just leaving our mistakes to be suffered through by them. So I agree with you on that. It makes me think about the partnership that we have with you and your sister and so many of our other activists and creators in different spaces. And I want to ask you, why are brand partnerships like yours with Logitech important within the work that you do?
Yeah, brand partnerships are really important for us. I mean, we try to be as discerning as we can when it comes to brand partnerships, because as I mentioned, there is so much greenwashing and token action by corporations. So we really want to ensure that if we enter a partnership, we're both on the same page when it comes to promoting sustainable practice, both behind the scenes as well as in the front in the partnership. So when good partnerships do come along, for example, like this one with Logitech, they are so incredibly valuable to us, because everything our charity offers is completely free, and we really want it to stay that way. And so a long time we really self-funded it, and that was obviously going to become less possible the more our charity grew. And so partnerships really help to create longevity to our work. And we're also a really small charity, so partnerships really help to magnify our voice and help us to reach new audiences of people. And of course, as I said, we want to ensure that the messaging with companies aligns with our charity's ambitions. But if we feel it is a really meaningful partnership, like the one we have with Logitech, then it is incredibly valuable to us.
We are so happy to have you. I think that amplifying your voice for us is the highlight of what we do, because we create to amplify voices. We create to really expand visions, and to look into ideas for creators to expand on. And so I think that you and your sister really embody all of that, along with all of our other creators and activists. And so it's a labor of love for us to support you and to have interviews like this and to feature you, because what you're doing, that attention needs to be drawn to that. We need more of that positive social activity. So we are so proud to back you. And I think throughout this conversation, we didn't mention that you are a Defy logic creator under our definition, which is why we had you in the commercial. But we didn't talk about what it means to you and your sister to defy logic. And I'm curious about what you think.
Well, I would say to me, defying logic really means to just push the boundaries of what we think is possible and to challenge the status quo in really unique and constructive ways. Because I think that especially young people in the environmental movement defy logic every day, because we as the youth have this potential to make a huge positive difference, and it's something that we're seeing now more than ever. And we really drive action with urgency, and we hold accountable those that are responsible for the environmental and social issues that we're experiencing. And I think that standing up like this and defying society's expectations for us, that we have to wait until we're adults to be the change that we want to see, I think for me that's a perfect example of what it means to defy logic.
I think so too. I love that you use the word urgency, because when I think of activism, that is the center of it, right? We try to make people more urgent about a cause that they may be thinking can be left for later. And the more we leave these important things like climate justice to later, the more we fall behind on that. So I'm so proud of you and your sister and your family and your charity and what you all are doing, because wow, we all need it. We all need it. Like I'm gonna go raid my cleaning cabinet right now to see what I can do while having your website open, and I hope everyone else does too. Before we jump into the last segment of our talk, I would love if you could plug in where people can find you on Instagram, your website, and then the title of your book again, because I really think that's a good read for people to pick up.
Yeah, so our social media tags are at Kids Against Plastic on Instagram and Facebook, and at Kids v Plastic on Twitter. And our website is kidsagainstplastic.co.uk, so you can find all our resources and information on there. And for the book, actually, convenient placement here, it's called Be Plastic Lover. This is what it looks like. So yeah, you can find that online or independent.
Perfect. Product placement is key. Okay, so Amy, I don't want to stop talking to you, but clearly we have a time limit on this. So all my guests, when they come on, I love to play a this or that game with them, just so we can, loosen up all the serious talk and get to know your favorites a little bit better. And so I think in honor of Earth Day, it seems appropriate to play a destination and weather like game, like which one do you like more? So I think let's start with rain or shine.
I would say shine, because I live in the UK, so we get a lot of rain. So that would definitely go with shine there.
Do you think your sister would go with the same?
Yeah, I think so. We talk about this a lot, and it's starting to get into the summery weather here now, and we're both so grateful for it, because we don't want any more cold rain there.
I'm with you on that. I'm a sunshine girl any day, but there are some people who like rain, so I won't judge them on that. Beach or mountains?
That's a really tough one. I think I would say mountain, just because Nottingham, where I live, is about as far away from a beach as you can get in the UK. So I've really grown up in the mountains and hiking. So I would say I have a real connection to them as well.
I've never been to Nottingham, but now that you say that, I really want to go because I've grown up around beaches my entire life, beaches and lakes. So mountains are something I want to explore a lot more. Spring water or hot springs?
I would say spring water. I quite like cold water and like wild swimming. I love doing that. So yeah, I would have to go with spring water there.
Okay, okay. Fall or winter?
Fall, I think, or autumn as we call it here in the UK, because I'm
Awesome.
not a
It's
massive fan of cold weather.
so much proper, so much. Ugh, you all are so much better than us over there. Where did we get fall from? Autumn sounds better, I agree. Spring or summer?
Summer, I just love warm weather, and my birthday's in summer, so it's sort of a bonus for me.
People tend to choose the season that they're born in because when someone gives me this, I just say spring because I'm a spring baby, but I quite enjoy summer. So that is very, very funny that you brought your birthday up. Windy or snowy?
Oh, I'd say windy because I love water sports, I love sailing and windsurfing, so I need windy conditions for that. So
Okay.
as much as I love snow and a good snowman, yeah, I choose my water sports over that.
Oh my gosh. I thought I would choose windy, but I've actually come to appreciate snow living in the Midwest for the past 2 years. So a good snow that, doesn't keep you inside for too long is quite nice.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into a lot of windy sports, so that's really cool. I'm gonna talk to you more about that later. And the last one, coastal or inland?
I think I would say inland just for the same reason as before, because as much as I love the coast and beaches, I've grown up inland, so yeah, I've just got more experience of that environment.
All right, I hope Ella doesn't get too mad at your choices because you represented both of you in this conversation.
She would probably choose beaches a lot more than I have, so she's gonna be a bit betrayed by me, I think.
That's all right. That's all right. You were honest, and that's all that matters. Amy, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate your honesty, your integrity, your activism, and your passion so much. And I know everyone listening and watching does too. So again, I just, with all my gratitude, thank you for taking the time out to talk with me today.
No, thank you so much. I've really loved being a part of it, and it's been amazing to speak to you.
Awesome. We'll keep in touch and we'll talk again.
Bye. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining LogiTalk today as we continue to recognize the people who are pushing beyond reason to inspire and change the world. This series will continue to share the stories of trailblazers to help really fire up the new generation of creators and activists. Make sure to stay tuned for more. Next time here on LogiTalk, we will be honoring and discussing AAPI Heritage Month with another trailblazing guest. See you next time.